Cases, deaths continue to rise at record.
Please listen to this.
The week before the election, less than 3 months ago, roughly 1,000 Americans were dying per day. This past week, the country reported several straight days with more than 4,000 COVID-19 deaths each day.
Several days of over 4,000 each day. The information in the news that you're about to hear today is going to be overwhelming. It's going to be overwhelming, not only from a medical perspective, but it's going to be overwhelming from a political perspective. I must warn my viewers as listening to this particular message today. Do not allow for this information to withdraw your emotions to the point of you giving up or declaring defeat on our democracy as we know it here in America. They have discovered some new truths in regards to what Donald Trump had actually done during the process of trying to throw the election. As you listen to this, do not be overwhelmed to the extent that you allow for this to bother you psychologically. Please understand that until the tribunal court that is to start February the 9th, until the court is over with, there has not been nothing finalized. And what you're about to hear in regards to Donald J. Trump, the prior president that is now a civilian, is simply gestures or simply accusations accusing him of doing what that he has done. Until these matters have been proven in a court, without a shadow of a doubt, they will remain just exactly that. They will remain as accusations. So please, as you listen to this, do not allow for your emotions to take over to the point of developing harsh, bad opinions one way or the other.
The new CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, says to expect 100,000 more American deaths by as early as mid-February, less than a month away. The CDC has already warned that the new and more contagious COVID-19 variant will likely cause another major surge by March. President Joe Biden has unveiled what he calls a, quote, full-scale wartime effort, a national strategy to combat and defeat the disease. But unlike his predecessor, Biden isn't afraid to tell the American people the truth about what we're up against in the near future.
In the next few months, masks, not vaccinations, are the single best defense that we have against COVID-19. Medical experts say that by wearing masks from now until April, we will save more than 50,000 lives. I'll always level with you, I promise you. And the brutal truth is that things are going to get worse the next several months before they get better. We didn't get into this mess overnight. It's going to take time for us to turn things around. But we also have to act now, with urgency and unity as the United States of America.
Meanwhile, the failed former president has spoken publicly for the first time since fleeing to Florida, telling the Washington Examiner, who was a reporter who was somehow able to approach the disgraced former president while he was having lunch at what is apparently his regular table in the grill room of his private golf resort. He said, quote, "We'll do something, but not just yet," end quote, which fondly recalls the vagaries with which he often spoke to convey absolutely nothing. However, it appears that the not just yet may arrive sooner than later for the failed former president, because in roughly 24 hours, the House of Representatives will deliver the article of impeachment for incitement of insurrection against him to the Senate. The trial in the Senate, which is expected to be relatively short, is scheduled to begin exactly 2 weeks later, February the 8th. It comes amid two major reports, one revealing new insight into the failed former president's political future. Apparently, the foam pillow guy is set to pick up that torch, which frankly seems like a fire hazard. And the other revealing new details about his seditious last days in office as he desperately tried to destroy American democracy. NBC News has confirmed the New York Times reporting, which details what appears to be a near coup at the Justice Department during the failed former president's desperate final push to have the election results overturned in his favor, specifically in Georgia. Earlier this month, the seditious former president almost replaced the acting attorney general, Jeffrey Rosen, with a random DOJ lawyer named Jeffrey Clark, who was willing to not only advance baseless claims of widespread voter fraud, but wanted to use the power of America's Justice Department to intimidate and pressure Georgia officials to bend to his wishes. This is in addition to the multiple calls that the failed former president made to Georgia officials demanding that they change the results of the election, including the hour-long phone call in which he demanded that the Georgia Secretary of State commit voter fraud and magically find 11,780 votes in his favor. The New York Times adds that the failed former president couldn't understand why America's Justice Department wasn't fighting harder for him, and he had not found evidence to support the ridiculous conspiracy theories that he and his bumbling team of personal attorneys had put forth. The Wall Street Journal adds that he even demanded that the Justice Department ask the U.S. Supreme Court to invalidate the election for no other reason than that he is delusional, insecure, and lost. The Senate's new majority leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer, has responded to the new reporting, tweeting, quote, "Unconscionable. A Trump Justice Department leader would conspire to subvert the people's will." The Justice Department Inspector General must launch an investigation into this attempted sedition now, and the Senate will move forward with Trump's impeachment trial. Joining me now is one of the 9 House managers for Donald Trump's second impeachment trial, Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California. He's a member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. You are ready now for your case. I understand from your fellow impeachment managers that you've been ready at any point for this case to go to the Senate. Does this new information play into it? Maybe it's not part of the fomenting an insurrection, but it is remarkable that Donald Trump was working on several fronts, not the least of which was inciting a mob, but he was really trying to get this election overturned.
Once more, the key word here is unconscionable. It's almost unconscientiable whenever you think that a president that's supposed to be for the benefit and the will of the people would have tried to pull off something like this. You know, I've really put a lot of deep thought into all of this, and the $64,000 question still remains: what would have Donald Trump done if this had turned into nothing more than a bloodbath towards holding hostages and killing hostages up in the Capitol building? Was Donald Trump really and truly intending on taking over the American government in a illegitimate way like this? Because if so, as far as I am concerned, this puts him in the same perspective of being a terrorist, because he knows the rules and the regulations. He knows the proper way towards how we do things here in America and how we don't do things. And if his imagery, if his motive, if his intent, in which that's the whole thing in behind court, is to try to find out what the intent was, if his intent was to do something like this, not only should he be banned from ever running again for any type of public office in America, but he should be reprimanded severely by a tribunal government that is now building a case against Donald J. Trump. So as you listen to this, please listen to it open-mindedly. And once more, our opinions here at the Windmill Ministries is simply that. It's our opinions, and we know that our opinions is not the majority or the minority. It's simply our opinions. But you have to ask the simple question, the $64,000 question, hypothetically speaking: what if Donald Trump was solely dependent upon total chaos that day to the point that he himself become the remaining president during however many years. So yes, our democracy was at stake January the 6th. That will go down in history. 100 years from now, 200 years from now, however long that the world prospers and lives and goes on. But historians will look at this and say, my God, how in the world did this ever occur in the good old U.S. of A? Historians, people that will read about us, not just read about us towards us going through COVID pertaining to a coronavirus, but people that will read about us 100, 200 years from now, or even 500 years from now, will say, my God, how in the world did something like this ever get loosed here in America?
Thank you, Ali, for your question. We're ready to go now. We'll be ready to go the week of February 8th. We don't disclose our trial strategy publicly. However, I note that the article of impeachment does reference Trump's phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State, where he asked him to find 11,780 votes. And these new articles are certainly highly disturbing. What they do show is the former president became increasingly desperate when his attempts to overturn the election failed. And then January 6th was his last option, basically to stop Congress from formalizing his defeat. And we all saw what happened on January 6th.
In other words, if this turns out to be as bad as what it could possibly turn out to be, this will make Watergate, this will make other tribunal trial affairs basically look like child's play in comparison to what this man right here tried to pull over the American people's eyes towards bringing this type of surrection into the American democracy pertaining to the leader of the free world. If this unveils itself the way that it could possibly unveil itself, this will make all other trial and court hearings that has ever been heard up in Washington, D.C. pertaining to tribunal courts, this will make them look like child's play in comparison to this particular event right here.
There's a question among some about whether this impeachment affects unity and whether the Constitution even provides for impeaching someone who's left office. But fundamentally, this comes down to a very clear matter of right or wrong, and more specifically, of breaking the law. How do you get that message through to Republican senators who are using these other arguments, including the fact that it's not good for bringing the country together?
So look, I would much rather not be prosecuting this trial in the U.S. Senate. I'd rather be working on bills help the American people. I'd rather be working on healing our nation. But we can't just ignore what happened on January 6th. This was a violent attack on our nation's capital, incited by the former president, resulting in multiple deaths. You had members of this mob trying to assassinate Speaker Pelosi, trying to assassinate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, trying to hang Vice President Pence. We can't just pretend that didn't happen, and we need to have a conviction to show that future presidents can never, ever try doing this again after they've lost an election.
Exactly.
You told the AP on Friday, I believe, that a number of Republican senators will realize that they need to have a separation from the former president because of the insurrection. Do you believe that to be true? I mean, I think 17 would have to come over and support Democrats in this.
That's correct. We're to present our case with the goal of getting 100 senators, and we do need 67 to convict. I'm very pleased that in the House, we had the highest bipartisan vote ever for impeachment, and we expect to get Republican senators to convict, and we're going to present a very good case. And at the end of the day, you can't ignore that our former commander-in-chief incited an attack on our own country.
Exactly.
So there's a message to be sent. There is sanction to be imposed, possibly on Donald Trump. But one of the other points you've made is that you, as members of Congress and the Senate, do have a responsibility here. You've got a responsibility that's outlined in the Constitution about actions you're supposed to take when there are things like insurrections, when people actually do undertake sedition.
Absolutely. So we also have to send a message to other countries and to future generations that if someone is going to incite a mob to attack the nation's capital, and that person is the former president of the United States, we can't just write press releases as a response. We have to take the strongest, swiftest action possible. That is impeachment followed by conviction. People died in this attack. We can't just wish it didn't happen. It happened, and it's going to be one of the most traumatic experiences in our nation's history.
Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California, thank you for joining us. Congressman Lieu is an impeachment manager in the 2021 Senate trial against Donald Trump. Those articles of impeachment will go to the Senate tomorrow. The trial will begin on February the 8th. Thank you for joining us, sir. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbala. Heidi, between impeachment and the pandemic, President Biden's got his hands full with issues of great heft as he begins his presidency. I'm curious as to what the scuttlebutt is about how much the impeachment enhances or distracts from Joe Biden's agenda.
Right now, they've been given this 2-week grace period, Ali, during which we're going to see more cabinet confirmations, more executive orders. From the perspective of both sides, I think this deal was cut between the Senate minority and majority leaders to try and get that regular business done that is seen during any administration, incoming administration. So this week, we will see exactly that, more executive orders. We saw a slew last week. This week, expect more, for instance, on COVID, on reopening schools. There is a full roster of cabinet nominees who will be confirmed this week, including the incoming Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Alejandro Mayorkas will go for a full vote on the Senate, as well as some others potentially, like Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary. But the big question here in these halls, Ali, is how is a 50-50 Senate going to operate in this new administration? And that is the answer that we do not have at this hour as we deliberate over this huge COVID spending deal. Right now, the new Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is very much keeping in his back pocket the threat of blowing up the filibuster. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell wanted a deal on this to protect the filibuster, and Chuck Schumer said, no, I'm keeping this as my back pocket option. And many Democrats are saying to their new leader, look, when it comes to this COVID stimulus, we either go big or we go home. We learned from the last administration in 2008, from the last Democratic administration, that when we don't put a huge infusion into the economy, when we are on our knees in terms of the economic pain that people are suffering, that it's not enough. Skinny versions of economic stimulus or anything else when we're in a state like we are right now are not enough. And so that is why it's notable, Ali, that some of the very people who advocated in that last administration for compromise with Republicans are now saying, look, we learned from that. We're going to get blamed in the 2022 midterms if we don't save this economy. And if we go small, we're just going to keep falling further down the hole, and it's going to require more to get us out of it. And that's why these early days are really a test as to whether the Republicans are going to be willing to go big, Ali.
Heidi, thank you as always for your analysis. NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbala for us on Capitol Hill this morning. Joining me now is NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. He's the author of several books, including Presidents of War, the epic story from 1807 to modern times. Michael, good to see you again. There are people who are arguing. Yeah, it is. I mean, look, there are people who are making the argument that what he did, what Donald Trump did in insurrecting or inciting that mob toward insurrection on January 6th wasn't really that. But now you have all of this context, and as an historian, I'm curious as to your take on it. We've got the calls to the Georgia state officials. We got the visits by the Michigan state officials to the White House. We've got the attempts in Pennsylvania, and now we have this new reporting 2 nights in a row from the New York Times about an actual official at the Department of Justice who was prepared to lead this effort to have the Justice Department lead the overturning of the election. All of this taken together may or may not be relevant to the senators who are voting on impeachment, but they are relevant to history and what Donald Trump has been up to.
Oh, totally, Ollie, and I agree with everything you've said. You know, Jefferson Davis was the head of the Confederacy. He incited an insurrection against the United States, and it caused a civil war. After the Civil War was over, did we treat Jefferson Davis as some honored citizen of the United States? No. He was in disgrace and he was punished. That is going to happen to Donald Trump if there is any justice, assuming that we find the evidence that we're talking about. This is a president who did something that no president has done before, and just about the worst thing that a president can possibly do, which is he tried to take away our democracy. And what we're now finding out is more and more, day by day, we will find out more and more evidence of not only how he tried to abuse presidential power to do that, but I would speculate that he had a lot closer relationships with some of the people who planned this insurrection and this attack on the Capitol. Had it succeeded, you could have had assassinations of the vice president and speaker. You could have had hostage taking. We would be in a terrible crisis. We might today, Ollie, be living in a dictatorship.
You know, there are various people with whom the president tried to conspire, some who were on his side and voted for him, who said we can't get involved in this stuff, including some of the legislators in Michigan and, of course, some of the officials in Georgia. This Department of Justice official, it's alarming that he decided to get involved. But we do have a few members of the United States Senate, namely Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, who were at the front of this issue. They weren't sort of kind of joining it. And there are several other senators and members of the House who were tacitly involved in it in the beginning and still haven't delivered a full-throated denunciation of what happened.
I want to weigh in real quick on this real quick. Donald Trump, within a week after him campaigning the way that he was campaigning, he realized that he was on a slippery slope. And he knew that at that point in time, that there was a possibility that he was going to lose this election. He understood the closeness of how the Democrats was pulling in Democrat states just as hard, if not harder, than in Republican states. Because he knew that the graphics was going to be basically the same or even close towards Biden, the people that vote for Biden versus the people that voted for Trump. This opens up a venue of somebody thinking these thoughts to the point of him thinking, well, because it is so close, because it's so narrow, if I was to start something like this, if the people pulled in the same direction as I think that they're going to pull, we could actually win this over. And if we didn't win it over legally, we could win it over illegally. In other words, if he knew that without a doubt that he was just basically throwing out popcorn and peanuts, whistling Dixie, as the South used to say, towards running for election, knowing that he was only going to get like a third or even a fourth of the votes, he wouldn't have stood a snowball chance, and you know what, towards ever pulling this off. But whenever you have a race that is so equally divided as this one was, give or take only 7 or 8 million votes towards Biden than it was towards Trump, it plants a seed in that individual's mind and in that individual's heart that if they was to start an election such as this, a takeover, that they could actually do it and pull it off to the degree that Donald Trump to this day would still be in power. I couldn't tell you the amount of people that I run into during the election that kept saying Civil War, Civil War, Civil War, Civil War. And I couldn't tell you the amount of people that I run into during the election, during this election, that would tell you, well, if there's ever an uprising towards a civil war, that means the current president that's in power right now, even though they elected Biden, the current president will have to remain in power. And it was almost as if everybody was urging everybody off the cliff towards being influenced in a civil war. I don't know if people understand how horrible war is. But whenever you see your children, your father, your mother, your brother, your neighbors, your friends sacrifice, because whenever I say sacrifice, I'm just not talking about somebody dying in front of you. I'm talking about it messes up everything pertaining to the food chain, pertaining to how we get our supplies and how we don't get our supplies. Everything gets thrown out of kilter to the point that the very supplies that right now you can go to Walmart or some big manufacturer or grocery store to get during a civil war probably won't be there. And if they are there, they'll do it like they done toilet paper towards issuing out only one package at a time. In other words, they'll limit towards what people can get and what people can't get to stop mass hoarding. And if they didn't do that, it would turn into total chaos. Total chaos as far as restricting how much toilet paper somebody could get. Because if not, they could back into Walmart and literally get a whole truckload, a heaping truckload of nothing but toilet paper. Or if they was in there gathering up steaks, or if they was in there gathering up whatever, they could literally, if they had the money, they could hoard whatever that they wanted to hoard. And if they had a big cooler at home, a commercialized cooler, they could basically store ain't no telling what in that cooler. The same way with anything, hoarding anything like that. This could have turned into a chaotic scenario, especially with as many people here in America that's got guns, and especially as many people that has been influenced by drugs, either directly or indirectly, towards either being on drugs that today need to be on some sort of drugs, or those that was born because their parents or their mother was on drugs and now they're addicted to drugs even though they never have taken a drug. We have a messed up situation here that could have wound up being catastrophic. Absolutely catastrophic. And it's just, to me, it's mind-boggling that anybody would be willing to drag their people through that. But yet now you want to call yourself the President of the United States? You want to call yourself the President of the free world? No. You ain't a president. You're now considered an oligarch. You're now considered a ruler or some sort of a dictator or a king or something. And that's exactly the pedestal that Donald Trump knowed that his followers, his loyal followers, was trying to put him on. And Donald Trump himself was even putting himself on that pedestal by saying obnoxious stuff like, oh, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody'd ever say a word. Or he would talk pertaining to violent intentions towards having the Clintons arrested, or having this one arrested, or going in behind the barn and doing something towards a street fight or a back alley fight. It was Donald Trump the whole time that was promoting this type of activity. And by promoting this type of activity, he's going to be luring in the same type of group of people that think the way that he was thinking, or the way at least that they thought that he was thinking. The bottom line is this: Donald Trump played a certain amount of people in America, and because the way that he played them, he should be held accountable for his actions. That's the bottom line.
And that's why the Senate trial is so important, and further investigations. We have to draw the line and say this can never, ever happen again, especially a member of Congress, along with the president, trying to take our democracy away. Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz went to the finest law schools in the United States. Is anyone trying to tell me that they did not know exactly what they're doing? Josh Hawley sits in the U.S. Senate seat from Missouri that was held by Harry Truman. For the Congress to do nothing and say, this is all over and let's everyone be friends again, I think that would suggest to people in the future that this was not as serious as it really was, and our democracy did not have this near-death experience.
Maybe there will come a day, Michael, where we can use historians like you for, history stuff. And I want to ask you quickly about the changes that were made in the White House, specifically in the Oval Office. The portrait of Andrew Jackson was taken down. Benjamin Franklin has replaced him. And there's an addition of a bust right behind the president of Cesar Chavez, the agricultural labor leader. What do you make of that and the symbolism of it?
Oh, I love the changes that President Biden has made in the Oval Office. It's like ancient Rome, where in a house you'd put up busts of the people you admire as an example to the guests who come in, and that's exactly what it is in the Oval Office. Benjamin Franklin, who represents the fact that we now, thank God, have a president who has great judgment and respect for science. Cesar Chavez, that bust right behind President Biden, wonderful labor organizer, early fighter for Latino rights in California and through the United States. We're living in a new age, and the Oval Office shows it.
Michael, good to see you as always. Thank you for joining us. Michael Beschloss is an NBC News presidential historian. He's the author of Presidents of War, the epic story from 1807 to modern times. The pandemic is devastating communities across the country, but it's hitting communities of color especially hard. We have known this fact from the beginning. We knew it would happen, and it happened. But when Dallas tried to prioritize vaccines for its most vulnerable residents, it was shut down. Coming up next, I'll speak to one of the commissioners who supported that prioritization.
I made a business out of my passion.
Once more, we're living in very, very uncertain times, just as the Bible predicts is going to occur. And as far as I am concerned, we not only have the politicians to blame for this, those that ruled over us, but we have the church sector to look at in regards towards equally sharing blame. Because whenever you have a society such as America or Europe or other places all over the world, including Canada, that have basically demoralized the very foundation of the Word of God in regards towards righteousness versus unrighteousness, that the majority of preachers to this day don't stand behind. They teach unity. They teach love. They teach forgiveness. They teach grace, which all those things that I'm talking about is fine and dandy. But they don't preach on punishment. They don't preach on condemnation. They don't preach on retribution. They don't preach on true righteousness or godliness. For some reason, our churches, not only here in America, but in other parts of the world too as well, have devoted a lot of their assemblies towards being nothing but just exactly that. A gathering place. Well, guess what? The way that I understand the Bible and the way that I have interpreted it, the churches are supposed to be the holiest of holy, pertaining to a sacred temple. A sacred temple that basically reaches the same level as our federal buildings, especially the Capitol building. they're supposed to reach on that same criteria of being sacred. And whenever you have somebody that's willing to bust that sacredcy up, eliminate the rules, and make their own rules, or basically create a mob that they know could possibly get out of hand, you're having somebody come in and try to re-engineer, reformulate something that our ancestors considered in being sacred. I'm like them, the commentators that's speaking right now. To let this go by without any type of accountability would be a failure upon our behalf, and it would be only opening up the door towards giving the green light in telling other people in other administrations or in other possible administrations that they can do this and get away with it, and there will not be no type of retribution or no type of consequences for engaging in this type of leadership. It's really sad whenever you have an enemy that's from within. In other words, if Donald Trump would have pulled this off, this thing could have become so bad over here that we wouldn't have had to have worried about our adversary across the pond coming over here and destroying us. We would have basically destroyed ourselves. We would have destroyed ourselves. That's what a civil war leads to. Unless there's a lot of diplomacy and people that's smart enough to look through the fine lines and say, wait a minute, guys, wait a minute. Isn't there a more civilized way that we can go about doing this other than violence and bloodshed? You know, whenever you're using primitive tactics of trying to resolve something that is in the 21st century, this is basically what you lead into. And just like they said a while ago, we come so close in this turning into something a whole lot more worser than what it occurred. And it was only, I believe, by the hand of God that prevented it from breaking loose. Because if they could have got their hands on Pelosi, if they could have got their hands on some of those other representatives in that Capitol, especially Mike Pence, I guarantee you, without a shadow of a doubt, this whole thing would have turned into something tragic, to the point that we as a society right now would be reaping not the benefits of, but we would be reaping the spoils and the damage thereof. We would be reaping nothing but horror and sorrow and catastrophe. Catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe, just like what we're witnessing right now with the coronavirus. It is so sad whenever we have a group of people that can't figure out through the statistics of what's going on and why it's going on, similar how we have figured out the statistics about the coronavirus. It's very simple. You follow the dots. The blacks and the Latinos are suffering more with the coronavirus than the whites on every level, not just population-wise, not just case-wise, but also on death-wise. So you do the same thing with politics in following the dots. It is so sad whenever you have leadership like you're reading about right now that tried to prioritize one group over another, which simply is discrimination. Let's listen to this real quick and then I'm going to let you go.
mostly Black and Latino communities.
Let's back it up. Right there.
Being hit the hardest. This week, we're again learning it's not just how the virus itself affects these communities, it's the disparities in vaccine distribution as well. Let's start with Texas. Right now, there are more than 2.2 million confirmed cases of coronavirus in that state, and more than 34,000 deaths, almost 35,000 now. Black and Latino residents account for 51% of Texas's population. But according to an analysis by the COVID Tracking Project, they make up 63% of the coronavirus cases and 59% of the coronavirus deaths in that state. And for that reason, county commissioners in Dallas created a plan to prioritize vaccines for vulnerable residents in mostly Black and Latino communities. But on Thursday, that plan was forced to shut down after the state threatened to cut the county's vaccine supply, saying the plan was, quote, not acceptable. Now, numbers from Dallas's database show that the areas that were being prioritized have had the highest increase in new cases over the past 2 weeks. Communities in certain Dallas areas are at high risk because they have few healthcare providers, and vaccine distribution sites are mostly located in white neighborhoods. So the plan to prioritize at-risk communities was to correct for what they saw as a problem that was underserving those neighborhoods. One Dallas commissioner who voted for the plan to prioritize the disadvantaged communities believes it was deemed unacceptable because the intent of the plan was mischaracterized. Joining me now is Dr. Teresa Daniel, Dallas County Commissioner for District 1. Dr. Daniel, thank you for being with us. What do you believe was mischaracterized? What was the intent of the plan, and what do you believe was misunderstood?
The intent, good morning and thanks for having me here. The intent was to focus in and delineate exactly where the more vulnerable populations were. And this is partially to the distribution, which is scattered throughout the county, but also getting the word out and getting people registered, because it's on an appointment basis, therefore you've got to register the people. But if you don't have a computer, if you don't have a smartphone, you're dependent on other forms to get information about the vaccine. First of all, should I do it? And second of all, if I want to get vaccinated, how do I do it?
So you had voted to rescind to not go ahead with this plan pending a new meeting in which you would recharacterize it. Did that meeting happen, and what does the new plan say that the old plan didn't?
The meeting itself did not happen, but there most definitely was a lot of discussion beforehand with recognizing that first, the top priority is get the vaccines to the people who need them, to all of us. So that when the threat was made to cut off the vaccines, you have to figure out, okay, now what can we do to not have that happen, first of all, but then within it, to find an equitable way of distributing the vaccines. So there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion on exactly how that would be. The terms included in our directions still include vulnerable populations. So you have to figure out, how do you identify that? And basically, if you have addresses of people, then chances are better that you're going to be using zip codes. The point of it being that
one of the things
that you can't exclude.
One of the things we've discussed across this country, and in Texas in particular, we always knew that there were going to be disparities. We knew that communities of color wouldn't get the testing as easily, and certainly wouldn't get the vaccine. And we all kind of agreed that doesn't feel right, and we should do something about it. But you, in District 1 in Dallas, you actually see what the disparities are. They're very basic. You just mentioned getting the communication out there, the idea that people have to register, overcoming the fear that exists in some communities of color of vaccination. And one basic one that you mentioned is, or that was reported on, is just public transportation. Fewer sites for testing and vaccine, and fewer ways to get to them with a lot of people who don't have cars, which in a place like Texas is a big deal. Here in New York, we don't have cars, it's fine. But in Dallas, not having a car when you need to get vaccines and testing is a very big deal.
Right.
Yeah, very good points. Right now, I'm working on 3 different locations in my district to get out and educate and register people. And with that, they have a better idea of how we can, whether it's mobile units, whether it's using more pharmacies, but figuring out that way of then distributing closer to people's homes, recognizing the transportation problems.
Dr. Teresa Daniel, thank you for the work you're doing. We'll follow up with you to see how this all goes. Dallas County Commissioner for District 1, Dr. Teresa Daniel. Well, the control of Congress might be in the hands of Democrats, but Republicans can still cause plenty of headaches when it comes to passing legislation.
They was using the word mischaracterizing different areas where they was issuing out the vaccine. I was using a different word, which maybe I shouldn't have used that word, towards prioritizing or mischaracterizing. But the bottom line is this: it is hitting the Latino and the Black communities worser with the coronavirus. We can see this. We can put the dots together and identify this. Just like there were certain people in the media, not just necessarily on the Democrat side, but there were certain people, including myself, that could see where this election was getting over into an area that was dangerous. And various people kept telling various people about the dangers, but nobody wanted to listen. Everybody wanted to pass it off like, oh, this ain't nothing. This ain't no big deal. It would have been, and it could have been a big deal. A deal so big, like our wildest imaginations never could have even begun to have conceived in regards towards destroying, dampering, or at least wounding our democracy. We as a society can never ever allow for this to ever occur again. It would be like us finding out that a doctor or somebody working for the pharmaceutical communities was purposely trying to injure or harm people versus trying to do good for people, and we just let it slide and didn't say a word about it, and nobody was willing to raise a red flag to it. We are not built that way here in America in regards towards accountability issues. Once more, I point my finger as much towards the politicians as I do the church communities for allowing this to have ever gotten in this type of shape to begin with. This did not start overnight in these type of illegitimacies, and I guarantee you it will not be taken care of and eliminated overnight. This is going to take something that everybody is going to have to work towards, just like President Biden has talked about, in unity, in pulling together as a community. And if we don't, like I said a while ago, we don't have to worry about our adversary across the pond coming over here and destroying us, because at the rate that we're going to wind up destroying ourselves, which is sad, because we're supposed to be a lot smarter and a lot better than this. So as I end this particular program, keep all these things in mind, but at the same time, keep in mind that these are our opinions about what we have seen, what we have experienced, just like the commentators and the various interviewers here. It's their professional opinions towards what that they have discovered and what that they can visually, tangibly see. And you as a spectator, a viewer, a supporter of the Windmill Ministries has to basically use your own capability in identifying whether or not you feel the same way as we do or whether or not you don't. In other words, you use your own ability to understand what has occurred here and what needs to occur here. We want to thank you for listening. God bless us all in these last days, just as the Bible teaches that in the last days, that as you shall see the days approaching, that no flesh shall be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened, just like they had a big uproar over in Russia pertaining to the protesters, just like they've had other uproars in other countries. That is basically nothing more than chaotic that is going on, even as I speak right now. So if there's ever been a time that we needed to engage and remember one another in prayer and support one another in Christ and try to evaluate these situations that Satan has inevitably tricked or led a lot of people into, it is now. It is today. Once more, thank you for listening. Good luck to all of us. May God bless America, and may God bless those who are striving for a better, holy, righteous way of life. And shalom.